Today's passage comes from 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 1 through 11 and verse 16. Hear the word of the Lord. Now when the king was settled in his house, and Yahweh had given him rest from all his enemies around him, the king said to the prophet Nathan, "See, now I am living in a house of cedar, but the ark of God stays in a tent." Nathan said to the king, "Go, do all that you have in mind, for Yahweh is with you." But the same night, the word of Yahweh came to Nathan. "Go tell my servant David, thus says Yahweh, are you the one to build me a house to live in? I have not lived in a house since the day I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day, but I have been moving about in a tent and a tabernacle. Wherever I have moved about among the people of Israel, did I ever speak a word with any of the tribal leaders of Israel whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, 'Why have you not built me a house of cedar?' Now, therefore, thus you shall say to my servant David, 'Thus says Yahweh of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep to be prince over my people Israel. And I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, so that they may live in their own place and be disturbed no more. And evildoers shall afflict them no more as formerly, from the time that I appointed judges over my people Israel. And I will give you rest from all your enemies. Moreover, Yahweh declares to you that Yahweh will make you a house. Your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever." The word of God to the people of God. Thanks be to God. When Karen and I were last house hunting, we were looking for something that the builders simply were not in the habit of building. We looked on the market and were hoping for something with a master bedroom on the ground floor, but there was simply nothing to be found in the whole market area. Recently, my brother-in-law has started searching for a new home with similar constraints and a similar request, and nothing suitable is he being able to find. So often, our dreams and ambitions and expectations just don't match up to the reality or the dreams or expectations of others. In terms of the housing market, with the press for buying houses, whatever a builder builds will be sold. There's no reason for the builder to be overly concerned with what people are actually looking for. How can we be sure that our dreams, our ambitions, our plans, and the things that we are trying to do with our lives actually match up with God's plans, with God's purposes, design, and ambitions for us? David wanted to do something special for Yahweh. He had come from very low roots. He had been simply a shepherd boy, the youngest of his family, sent out to care for the sheep and cut off from most of society around him. Yet Yahweh had taken this simple shepherd boy and raised him to a seat of power unequaled in the history of Israel. He had been granted victory after victory against his enemies, leading Israel as they attempted to claim freedom, as they expanded their territory, as they sought peace against their enemies round about. And now, at the closing time of David's career as king, he recognized that he wanted to leave behind some kind of legacy that would speak to his dedication to serving Yahweh. Something that would inspire others to dedicate their lives and devotion as well to the honor, service, and worship of Yahweh as the only true God in Israel. So he developed a plan looking at the norms of the world around Israel. Why is Yahweh's worship still centered in a tent, a tabernacle that harkens back to days long past when the Hebrews were little more than a nomadic people rescued from slavery? Now they were established in Yahweh's land, and they needed a more dignified place to gather for worship. Yahweh needed a building that would speak to Yahweh's greatness, Yahweh's faithfulness before the nation. And so David called Nathan in, the preeminent prophet in Israel after the death of Samuel. Called Nathan and said, "Nathan, this is my dream, this is my vision. I want to build a temple befitting Yahweh's greatness. After all, we are a people that are now settled in the land. We are no longer nomads. We are no longer vagrants wandering about the face of the earth with no land to claim as our home. Certainly, Yahweh needs a more fitting place for the people to come and worship in splendor and grandeur, in a building befitting the majesty, glory, and honor of Yahweh." Nathan heard of David's plan and became quickly overjoyed. He quickly looked to David and said, "You know, Yahweh has been with you at every step of the way in your rise to power and prominence in Israel. Certainly Yahweh is with you still. Go and do all that is in your heart." And Nathan returned home joyful over the prospect of seeing the worship of Yahweh moved into some magnificent center of worship, where people would come and gawk at the marvels in engineering and construction as a reminder of the greatness of Yahweh, and that there was no other that should claim their allegiance. But night fell, and Yahweh appeared to Nathan and said, "Nathan, your position is that of my mouthpiece in Israel. It is not to do and encourage others to do as your heart sees fit. Rather, the charge laid upon you is to echo my words, my will, my decisions, my guidance. Now return to David and give him my message. Speak my word." The prophet who had called David down when David's dalliance and rape of Bathsheba and murder of Uriah had cast him away from the path of Yahweh, was chastised by Yahweh as well. Called to remember that serving God was not about building something that fit his dreams and ambitions, goals and desires. Rather, the charge laid upon him was to promote and proclaim Yahweh's will and purpose. So Nathan returned to David and said, "Thus says Yahweh, I need no temple. I have been dwelling in a tabernacle now for generations because I am living in the midst of this people. I am not tied to any one location. The tabernacle is not simply a relic of days gone by. It is a symbol that I am with the people day in and day out, wherever they may go, whatever they may do. I am with them. No, there is no need for you to build me a house of cedar any more than I have asked the generations come before you to build me a temple of stone or cedar or some other grand construction. Whether you recognize it or not, an edifice erected as a temple to me will stand more as a symbol to your greatness, your accomplishment, your achievement. Rather, my concern is to be present in your life, in your actions, in your relationships, and in the community being built around you. While I appreciate the gesture, the desire to do something great for me, rather, I will build a house for you. Not a physical construction, not an edifice of stone, cedar, and marvelous woodworking and carving and engraving, but rather a people dedicated to serving and honoring me, following in your footsteps. David did not fully understand this message from Yahweh any more than Nathan really did. It would not be until John comes along to explain in his gospel in chapter 1 that Yahweh's intention was to come and build a tent to live around us, to take on flesh, to erect the tent of God's presence alongside us wherever we are, wherever we go. That is Yahweh's purpose. A temple, sure, it has its uses. A sanctuary can provide a wonderful place for us to gather as a people. But more often than not, it distracts us from why we are actually gathered there. David never built a temple to Yahweh. His son Solomon did. And we know that construction as Solomon's temple. It was destroyed and later Herod built a replacement, and we know that one as Herod's temple. Herod's, Solomon's, not Yahweh's. We know Yahweh by the coming of the long-awaited Messiah, dressed in human flesh, walking the roads alongside his disciples, and promising the coming of God's very Spirit, God's breath upon all flesh. That wherever we might go, whatever we might do, as we breathe in the presence of God, we can be reminded that God is present with us. Whether we gather in a fellowship hall, in the nave of a sanctuary, or in a Sunday school classroom, or whether we are scattered around the face of the earth in our own living rooms, God is with us. Those places that we want to call holy, sacred, and special indeed may be so. But God has never been limited to one of those edifices. God's presence has never been ensnared by the sanctuaries that we have erected across the face of the globe. Too often I have seen tourists coming to gather and gawk at the marvelous construction and ornamentation of cathedrals built across the globe. Their focus has rarely been upon finding God. God is found rather in lives transformed. God's house, God's sanctuary, the edifice and temple of God's presence is within us. Our sanctuaries, our gathering houses, our meeting rooms, too often are more of a crutch for our faith. God desires our transformation. But as Nathan and David, we can all too easily become swayed and carried away by our dreams and our ambitions. Our desires to build something great and lasting and beautiful, which may or may not coincide with God's dreams and ambitions. God says, David, the tabernacle is good enough. It is ornate enough. It is also a symbol that I have been with this people from the days of Abraham, bringing him from Ur of the Chaldees through Syria and into this land of promise, down into Egypt and back. I need no fixed edifice. I need no construction of brick, mortar, cedar. I need you. I need people who will allow my presence to flow through them. That is the kind of house I am looking for. What are we trying to build? Are we clinging to crutches that fail to point us to God? And somehow substituting them for true and honest worship?